Welcome to Talkin' Shit, the podcast where we get real about the unfiltered truths women face in the quest for perfection. I'm Jana, your host, a dietitian and fellow woman navigating the pressure to have it all together, the perfect body, career, relationships, and making it all look effortless. Who set that standard anyway? Here, we're calling out the diet fads, hustle culture, beauty standards, and everything else that keeps us feeling stuck. But we're not just venting, we're diving into how to break free and rewrite the rules on your terms. So grab a coffee or a glass of wine and let's talk some shit. Together, we'll uncover how to live a life that's unapologetically yours. This is Talkin' Shit. Let's dive in. Before we get into today's episode, I want to take a quick moment to share something special with you. If you're tired of dieting and feeling like food has more control over your life than you'd like, I want you to know there is another way. Inside my monthly membership, the Healthy Body Collective, women are losing weight and they're healing their relationship with food, balancing their blood sugar, and finally feeling confident and in control of their bodies again. This isn't about restriction, perfection, or quick fixes. It's about learning how to eat, how to support your metabolism, and how to build habits that actually work in real life. If you're ready for sustainable weight loss, calmer cravings, and support that truly meets you where you are, I would love to welcome you inside. You can learn more and join the Healthy Body Collective through the link in the show notes, or feel free to send me a DM on Instagram if you have any questions. Now, let's get into today's episode. All right, everyone, welcome back to the Talkin' Shit podcast. I am extremely excited for today's conversation with a licensed marriage and family therapist. Now, why am I bringing this into the Talkin' Shit podcast is because this is the stuff that impacts women the most, right? Like I always like to talk about the shit that matters most. And this is one of those that I think is going to really have a huge impact on maybe your own life where you're like, oh shit, someone does understand me and maybe I need to get a little bit more support on this. So I am so excited. Introduce yourself, tell us who you are, and let's get into our conversation.
Okay, well, first of all, thank you for having me, Jana. I'm really excited to be here and get to talk a little bit more about these subjects that I'm really passionate about. So my name is Paola Carricker. I'm a licensed marriage family therapist here in the Central Valley. I've been a therapist for over 20 years, and I'm actually currently working at Body Sense and Wellness, which is an integrated practice. So kind of goes along with this idea of mind and body connection. I've worked in various different kinds of capacities, but right now, really, my niche is working with individuals, couples. I am trained, I'm a level 3 Gottman trained therapist. I do a lot of emotion focused couples therapy. But I specifically am really passionate about working with women, perinatal, postnatal women, but especially now kind of dear to my heart, considering my age as perimenopausal women and really looking at the connection of how that impacts mental health. And then additionally, neurodivergence and how that really shows up a lot of late diagnosed women, and then really supporting couples. That's something that's not supported as much, is how to help couples navigate this season of life, and especially when you're looking into those aspects of neurodivergence. So that's a little bit about me.
Yay. I mean, I want to talk about all the things. And so I love the conversation, how it's opening up just in the space of women's health and women's hormones. Mm-hmm. There's so many things that we have not even had conversation around that happen to us every single day. So I think first and foremost, that's just amazing that we're having these conversations. And then I'm really excited to explore this a little bit more because we've talked about this on the podcast of like the physical aspect of, the physical changes during perimenopause and menopause and, what shifts from a nutrition perspective or, a movement or workout perspective. But we really haven't talked about the mental health aspect, particularly as it relates to what the individual is probably experiencing, but how it shows up interrelationally. And so that's what I'd really like to explore a little bit more. So tell me what you see within those dynamics.
Yeah. So, probably what you as well, you see is how many women, even women under their 30s, are like, something's going on. I feel broken. They're having to, for you, right, redefine their relationship with their body and food, and the things that used to work don't work. And so it's interesting how that shows up even in terms of the mental health and relationships. Wait a minute, what used to work doesn't work now. Why do I feel like I'm broken? I can't remember things. I'm not sleeping well. This heightened irritability that I start to hear, like the rage, I'm angry for no reason. Um, Anxiety is a big one. I get clients where they're having panic attacks. They're not sure what's going on with their body. And then just really being able to see that there's like a grieving the loss of the body, this identity. But also because there's all these hormonal changes and neurobiological changes, what I keep telling my clients is like, all of those systems that you had in place that worked for so many years to just be functioning and doing well, or even in your relationships, are now just like falling to the wayside. It's not working anymore. And so there's this sort of crisis. And specifically, I see that with couples in this season of life, where now women are changing, something's going on. And sometimes I'll hear, men feel like, okay, I don't know how to support my wife, or she's different, or she doesn't want to be close. And so couples really get into this place of crisis, and they come and see me because they don't know if they can work through these changes together. And a lot of them don't even understand what's going on. So if the woman's coming in feeling broken, not knowing, they haven't even been able to name it for themselves, then it's hard to then educate their partner. And so for me, it's so important to be able to support women and couples through this season, so that they don't end up, a lot of couples are in a place of discernment. Do we want to uncouple? Are we going to be able to do the next seasons of life together after the kids launch?
Yes. So I have some things that women have shared with me. It's so interesting because a lot of times, right, like when you're working one-on-one with an individual, a lot of times they assume that they're the only ones that are experiencing this. And then
Right.
you as the provider are like, nah, this sounds about right. And there was like
Yeah.
other people that, shared that today too, which is so interesting that we feel isolated in our experience when we're really not, which I think knowing that can be really healing first and foremost. But
Mm-hmm.
I've had women, they come in and their bodies are changing. They are
Mm-hmm.
saying, right, like from the weight perspective,
Mm-hmm.
I'm starting to gain weight. Even I haven't changed anything in my diet.
Right.
I'm
Mm-hmm.
working out even more and it's still not changing. They feel frustrated. So first and foremost, they're dealing with the emotion of frustration within their own self. And then,
Yep.
they've shared, I just want to divorce my husband. I
Mm-hmm.
don't like him touching me anymore. Like he just needs to get away. I can't stand my kids, but I love my kids. I feel
Mm-hmm.
selfish if I take my own time, but I'm drowning and I can't even
Mm-hmm.
identify my own needs. Like these are some of the things that women are sharing. Is this pretty common?
Oh yeah. I mean, it's like it almost seems like every session I have to, provide a lot of education, right? Going into what you're saying, right? Okay, this is what we know, the 20-pound weight gain and the midsection. So we're doing some of the education of like, here's just some things we know. But then even looking at like, did we know that you have a heightened sense of irritability around sensory, right? Why are the lights annoying me? Did you miss misophonia? Did you always chew so loud, right? Like, this just sense of like everything's irritating me, my tags, and there's just very little capacity. All of a sudden, my clients that are like, I love to be around crowds, and now I don't. And it is kind of a cruel joke. I tell people going through perimenopause or menopause, and then you've got teenagers, right? And so it can really be dicey because all of these experiences, changes in libido, noticing, I mean, just sleep alone. If you're having all of these issues around sleep, what we know around the brain is you're going to have a much more difficult time to regulate your emotions. So all of that all together, on top of it, if you're like, I'm so frustrated, I keep gaining weight, and then you've got people who are over exercising and going into caloric deficits and just all the things that then talk about the bandwidth just getting shorter and
Not there.
shorter. And then And then also, what I see is if we have situations in which women used to have capacity for a lot of selflessness and over functioning and managing all the schedules, right? And then you start throwing in some brain fog and the cognitive changes, neurological, and it's like, I can't remember things. Where did this go? Why can't I organize things like I used to? And especially, I see a lot of couples where they're both working. They have kids, pickups and drop-offs. Executive functioning starts to go down the wayside too. So it's just a recipe for disaster. And this is where I start to see women express the resentment, right, of years of doing all the things, and now I just can't anymore, and I just want to run away from my life. And it's hard to discern what is what. My reframe for a lot of my couples is to say, well, can we view this crisis as an opportunity for change? That we can look at those systems and say, well, maybe there were some things that set us up to not be able to do things very well, and maybe we can learn some new ways. Because this is highlighting, especially, for example, my clients that maybe had late diagnosis or they were never diagnosed with ADHD. I would say it's not like perimenopause caused ADHD. It's just exposing it now, especially in perimenopause or my postpartum women. And so being able to say, well, wow, now we can start talking about with our couples new communication styles, new ways of viewing things, maybe the stories and narratives that you have a lot of shoulds. Well, I should be able to do this, and I should be able to do this with the kids. And a lot of times those pressures you put on yourselves of shoulds is what's creating the distress versus like, well, why don't we redefine it now?
Mm-hmm. Could we go into a little bit more about that over functioning? Because I would say
Mm-hmm.
at least 80% of the women that I work with, they're
Mm-hmm.
achievers. They're usually type A,
Mm-hmm.
usually, people
Mm-hmm.
pleasers, or, like all the things. And so
Mm-hmm.
part of it is
Mm-hmm.
and I'm air quoting, their personality, right? Like, so there's a part of it that they really strive
Mm-hmm.
for. And there's the other
Mm-hmm.
part of it that just burns them out. So
Mm-hmm.
how do you convince someone that is an overachiever that they don't have to do that anymore and that everything will be taken care of, right? Because that's usually what comes up is like, if I don't do it, then no one else is going to do it. And then there's a whole other layer of like
For
control,
sure.
those type of,
Control.
yeah. And then that could
Well,
be
and
cause more anxiety, right? It's like, I can't do that, right? So how
right.
start that conversation?
Well, I think that's what's tricky. And that's where sometimes, individual therapy can be really helpful as well in terms of really deep diving because there's people know what they need to do. But when they really get into that, why am I experiencing such distress, right? Especially people, are we experiencing some struggles with high functioning codependency? I don't know how to not get into somebody else's lane. I don't know how to not give up control, the perfectionism, right? The usually we've got one person who's reading all the books and tracking all the things, and there's like an obsession, right? A hyper focus to be like, oh, and I want to, and that it's like being able to zoom out and see how you do the world. And some of these things were there for a lot longer, and to really look at, well, what's coming up for someone who feels like they have to control and manage all the things. And usually with my couples, what I see, and it's not judging, it's just again naming it, noticing it, like, oh, a lot of these dynamics showed up day one in the early stages of when someone wants to be a helper, and they're achievers, they activate, and so they're like, oh no, it's fine, I'll plan the dot dot dot, and you've already set the wheels in the motion of, because sometimes people struggle to just sit and let someone else do the thing. And you're right. If there's been broken trust, right, it's like group projects. You do all the work and you've enabled, right, that high functioning codependency, you've enabled a process where then people can underfunction. Well, yeah, when you burn yourself out and then a couple years in, you want to change the rules of the game and go, that's it, I'm done. You guys do it. And no one knows how to do things. So it's a process of first looking at, I even sometimes have to challenge myself. Am I a victim or am I a volunteer? Where is it self-imposed, right? To be able to go, hold on. And the perfectionism can be really dicey because if it's like you have a person that's like, tell me, no problem, I will manage the lane. I'll take the task card and do the thing. And then I'll have a partner who's like, yeah, but did you do this? But well, this could have been done, or it could be more efficient. The perfectionism kicks in. And so being able to go beyond just surface level, like this week, I want you to do ABC. If you start to notice that anxiety of like not being able to get out of your own way, well, what's that about? What are some of the fears? And especially for couples, it's I think that a lot of individual work can happen in the context of couples therapy because you're being able to see these dynamics and see what part you play. I would say there's no bad guy in my room. It's not a fault game. It's just we see what part you play in a dynamic, and then we want to be curious about it. So this does expose, especially in the season of life when you've been the overachiever and you've overfunctioned in so many ways, and now you're burning out, but then you have a hard time stopping because there's other components, even kids. If all of a sudden you want to change some of your parenting interventions overnight, it's really hard to get buy-in.
Mm-hmm. Do you find that even being able to create a space to have these conversations is helpful, or is there, because when you're sharing that, I just from my own experience with therapy and then
Mm-hmm.
also with coaching, it is a very humbling experience to truly take your like to look yourself in the mirror, right? They have this saying,
Mm-hmm.
the extent of growth that you can achieve is how honestly you can look at yourself and not.
Mm-hmm.
So, do you feel like that's a reservation for really women being able to do what they truly know they need to do, or where do you see the kind
Mm-hmm.
of pushback? Because how I hear it is,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
feel like there's a battle, right? Like they feel like they're literally
Yes.
battling these two sides. So how do
Mm-hmm.
you support in that?
And I think that's where it's hard because when you see people that are like stuck, there's something sometimes a little bit deeper, and that's where I want to be curious about, well, where are these stories and these narratives come from? Is this cultural, familial? How we're that's where we go into some of your family upbringing. We have these narratives of what does it mean to be a good mom, good wife, bad mom, the good and bad, the all or nothing thinking. And so a lot of the work, and for me at least, is to just be curious and look at, what were the roles like growing up? What were you exposed to? Are there some things like, I have a lot of women, they'll be like, well, I can't just, let's take apart something, or let's forget somebody who's got like ADHD. If they're saying, I just can't sit still, I just can't, there's always something to be doing, or I feel lazy, right? I'm sure you struggle with getting clients to see you don't have to be always doing the cardio junkie thing. Sometimes there's something to be said about just sleeping and restorative time. And so all of a sudden, this idea of just being with self, that can also be uncomfortable. There's My job is to really deconstruct their whole life and seeing the patterns of thinking, the relationships, what were they exposed to, what did they see in their parents, their culture, because a lot of these stories is what gets in the way. It's not what's happening, it's the story you're telling yourself about what's happening. And so that's where there's that disconnect of what I know I need to be doing, and then all of a sudden, what are the words that come up? Guilt, shame, fear. So what's driving that? Is it just you're afraid something bad's going to happen? That if I don't do it, something, what's the underlying fears? And so looking at even some of those cognitive distortions, the stories you heard even from parents, like, if a client of mine says, well, if I sat around, I remember my mom saying, oh, well, there's always something you could be doing. Don't be lazy. There it is.
Mhm.
That's like,
Yeah.
or I if you can you trust people? I mean, there's a lot of underlying things that's where sometimes um people feel like, why can't I just stop doing what I'm doing?
Mhm.
And,
So, what are some of those like stories that you found that like hold people back the most? Because I'd love to get into like
mhm,
the problem, the symptoms, all that. And then I always like to think and how do
mhm,
we move it forward, right? Like how do we essentially do it different?
yeah,
But we always, I mean,
mhm,
have to identify what's actually not working, right? And have clarity around that,
mhm.
create something to move forward with. So, what do you find are those stories that really are holding most women back?
I mean, it really just depends. So for example, I may be if I look at their way of thinking tends to be really black and white and not flexible. The good, they're all or nothing. I might challenge them to say, like, could we find the gray? What would be a gray area thinking? You know, if the story is, if I do that, I'm a bad person, right? Those negative beliefs of self. If I do that, that means I'm a bad mom. Or when my husband says this, my husband was doing this behavior, and so it means he doesn't care. Okay, well, where did that come from? Where does that story come from? So I'll usually just want people to be curious about their stories and then go, well, what could be some other stories? And very much, I'm a huge proponent of looking at language. So that's where even saying things like failure, success, what would be a different word? Right. Even when I hear somebody say, like, I don't know, okay, that's fine. I guess I can do some self-care, but I just know that tomorrow I need to worry about that. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. What would be a different kind of word? Would it be like something to consider? Would it be something to sit with? That language makes meaning. So if we're able to look at creating new language and new stories, then you may have a different somatic and an emotional experience, right? If I say, like, oh, tomorrow I'm taking some time to sit to be curious about some of those thoughts about this thing with my kid, or I'm going to sit down and really be considerate of, versus like, well, I guess tomorrow I'll just, I can't avoid it any longer, so I have to sit and worry about it. So the minute I say the word worry, and that's the part of where I look at some somatic work, like, if you tell one of your clients they have to do a weigh-in on Friday, and if I set them up with a bunch of electrodes, I can only imagine, like, right off the bat, what's this? When you look at that number on the scale, right, you create a story. Now, what we know, it's gravity, it's water, it's all the things, right? So you've told yourself a story about you, about your success, your failure. So even looking at those stories, how people demonize food, even, right? Or so if you can kind of zoom out and go, well, where did this story come from? What's real? What's reality? What would be a different kind of story?
Yeah.
And so that's big when you think about relationships, because, I told my spouse such and such, and then he forgot to do it. He told me he was going to go to the store. And then when he came home, I asked him, did you get the bread? He forgot to get the bread. So fact is, husband didn't remember to get the bread. What's the story you're telling yourself about that? Or let's say in this case, you were talking about the men who, or the women are like, I don't even want him to touch me. So if the wife says, I don't really feel like touch right now, I'm overstimulated. Okay. So husband, when she says those words, what's the story you tell yourself? It's, she doesn't love me anymore. I'm undesirable. I'm not good enough. Or it's all those are the stories. So, it is a little bit about trying to peel back the onion layer and being able to notice that. And a lot of times when they come in to see me for a thing, we start to open up other can of worms that then you start to see some of these patterns.
Yeah.
Right?
Two things that
if you came in because, yeah.
Yeah. No, it's so true. But why? So many women that are those overachievers, overperformers, a lot of times they say that they're lazy. How are those connect? Like, for example, like if they don't do XYZ, they're like, oh, I'm just lazy. And so they're identifying with that, even though they very much so are not that. How does that connection happen?
Right, because they've set up a narrative of, like, probably very all or nothing, right? That what does it mean to be good? What does it mean to be successful? And usually when you start to look back in time, if they were the overachievers, I'm going to be curious about what were the stories you heard in your home, and again, how many times we've had situations where kids are like, gosh, I tell them it's fine, don't worry about the A, you're fine. And sometimes neurobiologically, you've got these kiddos that are just so high strung, like, no, I have to get an A. And even if the parents are so supportive, and it's just interesting to see how their little brains, like, what does your brain do? What's the stories it tells yourself? So, you have to be busy all the time, or that there has to be, or outcome focused mindset. Like, I'm lazy if I'm not producing, if there's not a measurable thing. I checked off the boxes. So then I want to be wondering about like, well, where did that come from? This idea of like, how do we start to deconstruct those stories? Does it have to be called lazy? Would it be something else? And neurons that wired or fire together or fire together, wire together. So if you keep telling yourself that story, I mean, literally out loud, like, oh, I'm so lazy. Oh my God, I was supposed to do a 20-minute workout and I only did a 10-minute workout. Then you've just created the story. So being able to talk about it in a different way, reframing those thoughts, looking at what would it look like to define success in a new way. It's really hard, and for women especially, who are so, I mean, gosh, what a battle with society and culture, diet culture, and being small, and all the things. It's really hard.
Yeah. What are some of those? So for an individual that's, listening and she's like, "Yep, that's what I'm experiencing." What are some
Mm-hmm.
of those like first steps that you share with individuals to start that journey of like creating change for the next
Mm-hmm.
phase of life, if you will?
It really just depends what they're coming in for. But sometimes one, it's being able to see if they can have a sense of what those thoughts are and what's kind of getting in the way, and picking small baby steps to practice that. So if it's boundary setting, what would be sort of something that feels more manageable? If it's like a small self-care thing, if it's uh let's say, giving that example of that perfectionistic mindset to say, oh, it doesn't count unless I got my heart rate up or I worked out for an hour. If it's something related to that, say, well, could we look at a new way? What would it be like to practice a behavioral step that will allow you I mean, again, it's just exposure to be like, can we just try something this week that feels a little bit different? But it's also being able to have them see where those patterns are showing up in different parts of their life, right? So like, for example, if it's something where it's relationships to food, to perfectionism, to tracking, I'm like, okay, there's a certain way you're thinking through things. I might invite them to go, aha, do you notice that way of thinking, like outcome focus, black and white? Do you see that in your relationships? Do you notice that at work? Where does that show up in your marriage? And just mostly in the beginning for me is I invite people to be investigators and to just start to zoom out and watch the movie without judgment. And I'm even going to say them, I'm going to just want you to just tell me what you notice. And then I want them to start to practice some small behavioral steps. I think I saw one of your reels that you were talking about, like walking for 1 minute. One of the things I tell a lot of my clients, especially a lot of my neurodivergent clients, is, don't run on motivation, run on momentum. So especially if you've got someone who's really struggling with like that behavioral activation of saying your only job is to just pick one small thing. You do one dish. You just run on the momentum. And especially if people struggle with some depression, is to say, you may always struggle with this.
Mhm.
You may not ever feel motivated to. And you just choose to do one action. This last couple of weeks, I've really honed in on clients of the metaphor of like, your only job is to do the Amazon return. It's the one that no one wants to do. It's
Really?
the one that feels so easy to put off. Like, especially, just like, oh God, the return's been sitting there. The return's been sitting there. And I'm like, that one. Of all of them, the one thing I want you to do and prioritize is getting the Amazon return done, because it seems so symbolic for them of like, I did a thing. And then you just work on that momentum. So it really just depends on what someone's coming in for. If someone's coming in on things that are much more individually focused in terms of like navigating perimenopause and self-care, like the boundary setting, right? Like, what's one boundary you can practice, versus if they're coming in and they're wanting to navigate their part in a marital dynamic and being able to kind of clean up their side of the street. So
Mhm. Yeah, it's fascinating how our brains work. And it's so interesting that we dismiss those, and I'm air quoting, small things when they
mhm.
really are, like each time I speak with an expert in their space, it's always back to those small things to
Yeah.
really, give to see like, okay, I move forward, right? Like we just want to see
Yep.
that progress versus our brain can create such a story of disconnect that can make
Mm-hmm.
so many things so much bigger than what they really
Mm-hmm.
are, and then we just stay stuck, like you said earlier. So
Mm-hmm.
those small steps are not small by any means, and they really,
Mm-mm.
like you said, that momentum to keep moving
Yep.
forward, or heaven forbid, give yourself credit for doing something, right? Versus like
Mm-hmm.
that narrative of I'm just lazy and XYZ, whatever comes after that too.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. Because and people can get kind of a high when they're first doing a change. I'm sure you notice that with your field. It's like it's whether it's, I'm gonna stop alcohol, or I'm gonna go on a diet, or we're gonna do a thing. There's the initial high of the change of like something's gonna be different. And when all of a sudden things start, yeah, that 3 month mark, things, there's no more dopamine of even the excitement of the potential relief or the change. And so even looking at that, I try and educate my clients even a little bit about what we know. And, even with perimenopause, if what we know that estrogen fluctuates and it's impacting these different neurotransmitters, is going, wow, things don't feel novel anymore. And what's that like? What felt exciting? And what are you noticing now about what your brain craves or doesn't crave? And you might be excited when you're trying to do these changes. And what starts to happen when we want to default to our earlier, forget the behaviors, like, oh, we're starting to default to our old behaviors. We might be just our brain's defaulting to its old ways of thinking and being, and again, kind of noticing that.
Yeah, it seems to be around a 3 day mark. Like especially with like foods, just in general, or like meal.
Oh, okay.
There
Yeah.
seems to be something around that 3 day mark where a lot of people are like, yeah, I did
Mm.
good. And then that's usually like Monday to Wednesday. And then like Thursday starts like, oh, well, maybe I can, do this. And then Friday is really a slippery slope. And then the weekends is just a question mark. But there is that high that is like hit from trying something new. And then there's that valley of despair that eventually comes in because now we know, oh man, this is actually going to take some work to do the thing that I say I want to do. It's gonna change. I mean, you're gonna have to feel a lot of things.
Well, and especially, I mean, taking that example with food is the same way if somebody's struggling, let's say with alcohol, is I'll say to them like, well, okay, let's even look at that. The day Monday is no different than the day Sunday. So I just want to be curious. We're not going to change anything. In fact, your job is to not change any relationships or anything. I just want us to be curious about, what do you notice? So Monday, what are you noticing about your brain and body? What's the story you start to tell yourself? When does the part of self that's the rebellious part, like, well, I'm a grown ass woman and I can, or oh, well, it's Thursday, the I deserve, or it's been a hard week. So even being able to look at the stories around food, how we eroticize food. I mean, the joke I always tell my clients is like, how funny, you could be doing like a keto and somehow the banana becomes the cocaine. Now you're thinking about a banana. It's naughty. We've eroticized it. The minute you're not supposed to have it, and now becomes the forbidden fruit. So it's not even just looking at the relationship with food, it's looking at the stories around it. How do we reward ourselves, and what we start to feel, even feeling the anger, like someone's taking something away from us. And so being able to see those ways of thinking, and where does that even translate in other parts of our life, right? Where we're like, oh, do you view this as a thing you never get to do again? How do you reward yourself on the weekend? Emotionally, how do you feel? And so that's an important part before we even start to make any changes, is just to start to be curious and get some insight. Because that's the biggest thing that I see with people who haven't had any therapy, is that there's like a lack of just insight and self-awareness. And, the same way that like why I wish more people were doing like premarital, or even I love working with young clients that are navigating love and dating or post divorce recovery work, where it's like, oh, we never learned this stuff. How come we're not talking about attachment styles and all those things? Yeah, there's not even an awareness of, did you notice what the thought was? Did you notice what your body did the minute that the dietitian said such and such? Did your body feel calm? Did you feel resentful? Did you feel excited? Because if you don't even have awareness, then you're not going to be able to change any of those things.
Yeah, so true. Getting into the body and seeing like how does it feel and where does it feel, that can tell us a lot about, how to best support the person in general. That's very fascinating. I feel like I could talk for hours on this. Is there, so for those specifically during like perimenopause or menopause, but I'm even thinking about this,
Hmm.
like I would have loved to have some of these conversations, starting my period, transitioning into womanhood, or like
Hmm.
navigate, like you said, like the dating scene, or like having those
Hmm.
boundaries. Like I can just see this so like
Hmm.
generationally, right? Like if
Absolutely.
someone in their, 40s, 50s, 60s is starting to do these things, the impact that is likely having on, I'll just stick with like women, but their daughters, their
Hmm.
grandchildren, right? Like I just had a woman today, she's like, I know I had to have to change because I want to be around for my granddaughter, right?
Yeah.
Like that can be fantastic motivation. And it's so much, from my perspective, it's so much more than a number on the scale. Like they're literally changing so many different dynamics in their generation by setting those boundaries, by saying,
Hmm.
I I am okay to take care of myself.
Right.
Right? Like
Modeling. Hmm.
so, and it's so true
Hmm.
because now from again, a 9-year-old's eyes, you're like, oh, it's okay if I
Hmm.
am not stressed the
Hmm.
fuck out all the time.
Right. Yeah. Like how are you changing those intergenerational patterns? What's the language you're using in the home? How are you modeling this? Are you just planting those seeds so that eventually they can kind of see? I've got two teen girls and one little guy, and it's like I was saying, hopefully those seeds will, you just
Yeah.
plant them. You just plant them that having them, and I'll tell them, I'll be like, I don't. There's a lot of times I don't feel, in fact, a lot of times I don't want to go play tennis. I don't feel motivated to go. And I'm like, I also know my brain and I run on momentum. And I'm like, I've got a tennis match. And every time I'm there, I'm like, I'm so glad I came to, and being able to just educate them. So it's not working out for just body aesthetics. It's again, just more like, of course, mental health for me, I say, well, this is something we need to help keep our body moving. And, here are the chemicals it produces. And, so just changing those things. But a lot of it is modeling what they see, what's the kind of language they see amongst grandparents and parents, and how we talk through these things. It's really important to kind of challenge some of those cultural and familial narratives that people grew up with. And it's why I really praise a lot of my couples that come in, even couples that I have a lot of people that just come for maintenance, as it should be, right? Like going to the dentist. I don't schedule people like forced to come every week. And I love when people are like, oh, we just want to do a tune up. We're not in crisis. We just want to name it. We want to be able to talk through some of the things we've been doing, what's working, a lot of front loading. Oh, we got the holidays coming up, or oh, summertime's coming up, people with kids. Okay, let's start thinking about things. And so not having it be pathologized, right? A lot of times if you see a dietitian, it used to be because you're overweight, you need to see a dietitian,
Yeah.
right? Versus having it be normalized that we're just I really love integrative practice, and I want especially women to feel like there's a team. You've got your nutritionist, you've got your primary care, um, we've got a massage therapist here. I'm really good friends with a primary care doc, and I love collaborative care. And so I want people to feel like they can go through all the seasons. I tell my clients, I'm like, I'm going to be there for you during your pregnancy, postpartum. Hopefully, I'll help you navigate the teen years, menopause,
Yeah.
launching, and we're just there through all the seasons.
Yeah. I love that because that's truly having the support that we need, because so often like we don't talk about the things that really impact us, and then we wonder why we're struggling so much essentially, when it but
Absolutely.
and it doesn't have, I mean, even for therapy, right? Like it used to be like you went to a therapist because you were crazy. It's like, no, not really. Like you go for that
Mm-hmm.
proactive, lens of saying like, hey, I know this about myself, and I know I can get like a
Mm-hmm.
little activated when this happens, or in transitions, or
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
during summer, or all, you fill in the blank. So I just want to make sure that I'm supporting myself to be able to navigate that the best that I can. What a different lens that is than, oh, I just,
Mm-hmm.
it's because I'm crazy. No, probably
Right.
not.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And that's been a big part too for me. when I was working in San Diego in the community clinics, I know that, you've worked with diabetics, and it was such an opening for me because I saw a lot of Latino clients and I am Spanish speaking. And it was like so great to get to break up this stigma. Like, no, this is just what we do, because so much of their mental health issues were manifesting in somatic ways, right? And then I'd see that in their blood sugar level and just all that. So to be able to be like, no, this is what we do. You're not crazy. This, in fact, again, let's just explore things. Let's name it to tame it. And so I really think it's important for people to not view, don't wait till there's a problem. That's always the part that makes me feel so bummed out when I have people come to me when they're in crisis, and I'm like, gosh, if we would have just started naming this stuff so much sooner. But people wait until they need it, and I'm like, oh no, so it's tough.
Well,
And I'll tell you, with women, one thing that's also really unfortunate is when I'm doing my assessments, I can't tell you how many women have had untreated postpartum or postnatal anxiety that they didn't really realize, and that just became chronic. It just set up the building blocks there. So there was something going on back there. So, and then we're treating it so much later.
yeah. Well, I think that's the importance of these conversations and podcasts is it really allows us to have access to new and different information to ideally be
Mm-hmm.
able to be proactive versus reactive and just to start the like you said I say this often like we got to plant that seed and then we'll see like
Mm-hmm.
what comes of it, but we have to nurture it and support it and
Mm-hmm.
water it and care for it and all those things in order for it to really grow into what we want. But there's so much support out there for individuals, and I hope that they take that next step. So tell us where can they find you and how can they get connected if they're like, okay, I'm ready to have open that conversation.
Yeah, so I know you're going to link my website. People can go onto my website. They can read more about my services or my full couples assessment. I do have an Instagram page, which is the @therapist_Paola page. And usually, I have clients just contact me. I don't see any children or adolescents. I only see adults. I also do see clients for sports psychology, that kind of thing. But I don't require, it's important for people to know that, some people sometimes are in a place where they're like, I don't want to do traditional every week therapy, or that's a financial strain for us. Obviously, I'm going to let people know if their situation is something that really needs a higher level of care, of course. But a lot of the kinds of clients that I see, we're in a place where, unless if they're in a crisis, we might see them a lot more in the beginning, right? My couples weekly or in the beginning with an individual. But I like people to be able to figure out what works for them. So if it's like, okay, we'll see each other in 2 weeks or in 3 weeks, or let's talk about it, or we're in maintenance. So there's not like a scheduling app. You just literally can message me through the website. My phone number's there. They can call me, and then we can just go from there. What I want my couples to know is that they do require doing the full 3-part assessment. So I don't just dive into couples therapy. I do what I call like my CT scan. So it is a traditional Gottman couples assessment in which a couple comes in for 90 minutes. And then I see each person one time for 60 minutes to do their individual assessment. And then they come back and I do, they actually do these online questionnaires through the Gottman Institute. It's like a full battery of questions. And then I get a report. And so when the couple comes back to me, I go over the report results. And that tells me their strengths, their areas of weaknesses, and specific interventions we need to be doing. So we do that full assessment before we even dive in. And that's even with couples who are in crisis. Like if there's been an affair discovery, I still have people go through this process so I can really know how to help them. Individuals, we pretty much just dive in, do an initial intake, 60 minutes, and then I see them, whatever we work out. So they can email me, call me, even text me. I don't accept insurance. I am a cash pay practice, but I do provide super bills for those clients who their insurances are willing to reimburse them for out-of-network providers.
Awesome. I love the Gottman Institute is so just amazing just in what they do in and of itself for the individual and also for
Mhm.
couples. Like it's so cool just how they
Mhm.
really the goal is to bring together and to heal. So I think
Mhm.
that's wonderful that you do that. Well, this has been an absolute pleasure. I really love this conversation. I am such a huge advocate of mental health, and May is Mental Health Month, so I think this is perfect timing as well.
Yes.
And I
Mhm.
think more individuals need to just talk about it, literally, um,
Mhm.
versus
Mhm.
maybe resent about it or stuff it or,
Mhm. Mhm.
just like shove it away into a compartment that's always going to be there. So I'm glad
Right.
you're,
Right. Exactly.
thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jan. I really appreciate it.
This has been Talkin' Shit. If you like this episode, please give it a thumbs up or leave a review on the Apple Podcast app. If you want more episodes, click that subscribe button. And if you want to learn more, visit healthwins.org. Talkin' Shit is produced and hosted by me, Jana. This production is also made possible by the Community Media Access Collaborative. Learn more at cmac.tv. See you next time.